So welcome everybody. Thanks for tuning in tonight. This is our second talk in our 5-part series. And tonight I'm going to be talking about starting your seeds and then also some general plant care for you folks up in Page. And this is a photo that Alyssa Jones, my lovely co-host and Coconino County Master Gardener, shared with me, and this is all food that she grew in her garden last year. So we can really grow a lot of great things in northern Arizona, but we just have a challenging environment, but that doesn't mean it's impossible. So hopefully that's some inspiration for you all. I'm just going to ask you a question, and since the group is relatively small, and I guess I should just say this for the entire class, feel free to unmute yourselves if you have any questions anytime during the talk. You could also put things in the chat box, but unfortunately, while I'm sharing my screen, I can't really see them. But maybe Alyssa could just read the chat box too and pause and ask me questions if you put them in there. So I want to ask the group, why would you want to start your own seeds? What are some advantages that you could think of for starting your own seeds in your garden or in your house for your garden?
They're ready to go in the dirt.
Yep. So if you start your own seeds, you can get a jump on the growing season. So maybe Danielle doesn't have her plants in yet at the ACE up there. So that's one reason. Anybody else? Can you think of any other reasons why you might want to start your own seeds?
Are seeds usually cheaper than buying starts?
Absolutely. All right. What I can't see your name, but I can see your face. What's your name?
My name's Summer.
Hi, Summer. Good answer. So absolutely, it's a lot cheaper to buy a packet of seeds than it is to buy a transplant from the store. Anybody else think of any ideas?
Guess if you have 100 seeds and you start them, there's a good chance you'll get 50 plants.
Yep. So more again, I think that comes back to it's more economical.
Mm-hmm.
So a packet of 100 seeds, even if you only get 50 germinated, that's sure is a lot cheaper than 50 plants, 50 starts.
Micah says because it's fun.
Yes, it is fun. And you know what? I should put that on my list.
Fun.
It is fun. Okay, so does anybody else have anything else they want to throw out there?
I just love starting them. I like starting from the very beginning and getting them to go. I think it's great.
Absolutely. You get to see the entire process from the start to the end, and you know exactly what you've done to those plants. You know what fertilizers you've added. You know that if you're going organic, you know what type of organic pesticides that you're using on your plants. So absolutely, you know your plant's life from the start to the end. So that's really important.
And I like to grow crazy things.
Healthier.
Say it again, anybody.
Go ahead.
They're usually healthier.
Your plants are, yeah, depending on what you're doing to them. Absolutely. It's like I mentioned before, if you're going the organic route and you don't want to apply any synthetic chemicals, the plants are definitely going to be better for you to eat. So those are all some really good ideas that you have. And we covered a lot from what I have on my list. So a couple other things I want to mention is that when you start your own seeds, you could pretty much tailor your garden to your needs and what you like. And there are just more options in general than what you can typically find in your local nursery or big box store. So with that said, especially when you're shopping in the big box stores, you can, or when you're when we're looking at shopping, comparing starting your own seeds and buying them at the big box stores, usually the big box stores will just order in what they're used to selling and what's popular. So you don't really have specialty plants or heirloom varieties or plants that you know are going to do really well in your local area. Whereas somebody like Danielle, who's ordering the plants over at Reds, she's more in tune to what's going to do well at the local level than like a big box store would be. So with that, you can customize your garden plants to the really unique climate that we grow in northern Arizona. You can get a jump on the growing season, so you can start gardening earlier if you are feeling that itch in the middle of winter or early spring. You can start your own seeds and start gardening indoors. This is a really great reason to start your own seeds, is that you save money by starting your own plants for the reasons that we already mentioned earlier. It's really fun to collect seed from your plants in the summer or in the fall after they've gone to fruit, and share them with your friends. But we could have an entire class just on this topic, but it's definitely an option. And then you can share your seeds with your friends and grow plants from shared community seeds. So what happens when you harvest seeds from your garden is that generation after generation, those plants are becoming more accustomed to your unique growing climate. So we have a seed library here in Flagstaff that Master Gardener started, and a lot of people will collect seeds from their plants, vegetables, and even perennial plants, and then donate them to the seed library. And in the spring, check those seeds back out and grow them out, and then start the whole process over again. And I have a picture of that I'll show everybody later. So growing by seed, it may seem intimidating, but you really don't need a whole lot of fancy supplies to do it at all. It's a pretty simple process. So what you basically need are containers. So you can buy commercially made containers. There are a lot of options out there. We're going to look at some that I used to use in the nursery trade that you could use at home. Or easy enough, you can recycle yogurt containers or repurpose or reuse egg cartons, pie tins. There are a lot of different household items that you use in your kitchen that can serve as containers. And all you have to do is just remember to punch holes in the bottom of your containers, because your plants are going to need some drainage. So growing media is just what horticulturalists like myself call potting soils. So potting soils aren't really soils at all. They're fictitious soils that we make or buy that mimic soil and serve the same purpose as soil. So we'll talk a lot more about those during this lesson, because it's actually pretty important to choose the right growing media for what you're doing. A spray bottle for watering and fertilizing. So that's a pretty cheap and easy thing to pick up. And we'll talk more about that. Seeds, of course, you'll need seeds. They're usually pretty easy to get, but during the pandemic, a lot of places have been selling out. So I would recommend start buying them now if you have not already, because I've heard that things are selling out. Another thing that is really going to help you out a lot, and I'll show you a picture of this, is some bottom heat. So a heat mat, and they're relatively inexpensive to buy on their own. Where they get expensive is when you have to buy the thermostat to really regulate the temperature of your heat mat. But for home growers, I don't really think that that's necessary. And I'll show you a couple of pictures of some heat mats, but they will make a huge difference in your germination rates. And you can usually get them for like maybe the smaller ones for like 30 to maybe $50. Good investment. And then supplemental light. So typically when you're starting seeds, the light in your window isn't really good enough unless you have a really, really bright space. So I recommend getting some supplemental light, and just the regular old fluorescent household lights are okay. And then you just have to have them 2 to 4 inches above the plants so they avoid stretching. And we'll talk more about this and just look at some photos during this talk. So you really don't need that many supplies. So for a lot of this talk, I'm going to be mostly talking about starting your own seeds indoors. And then we'll look at why you would want to start some seeds indoors, or what seeds do you want to start indoors versus what seeds will do better if you just sow them in the ground. So when you're growing seeds indoors, it's really important to understand the right conditions in order to get them to germinate and get really good germination rates. And in general, whether you're sowing seeds indoors or outdoors, or they're just wildflowers germinating in the wild, there are 4 key elements that need to be introduced to a seed in order for germination to take place. So the first is water. You want to wet your seed starting media, your growing media, and you don't want it to be soaking wet, but you kind of want it to be like a moist sponge. What you really want to do is avoid it drying out, because seeds are really fragile, and once they start imbibing water, so taking that water on to start the germination process, if they dry out, like bone dry, they're just going to die. So you need water to start seeds, oxygen, temperature, and light. So those are the 4 key elements. When we look at oxygen, seeds are living things. So they're essentially, respiration is happening. So they're kind of breathing. So that's why you want to avoid overwatering your seeds. So this is another mistake that people will make, is that they'll either let their seed starting media get too dry and then the seedlings will just die, or they make it too wet and then the seed will kind of just suffocate. So you want to avoid overwatering, just a happy medium in there. The temperature is going to be sometimes really important for different species, but in general, the rule is the seeds need to be in an environment that's 60 to 75 degrees. So here you can see I've got these. This is a picture that I took from when I was the grower at the Arboretum. And these blue mats are heat mats. Now these are really long because I was in a commercial greenhouse, but you can buy them you can buy mats that are a lot smaller than that. And they are really, really going to make a difference for germinating seeds, especially with peppers. And I learned that the hard way. I started peppers just on the bench without any heat, and I got hardly any germination. And then the next year I put them on that heat and I got really great germination. So we'll talk about optimal temperatures and how you know what temperatures your seeds need to get the best germination in a couple of slides. And then light. So light's the last of the 4 key elements. And some seeds are going to need light to germinate, like lettuce, columbine, poppies, for example. So lettuce is a vegetable. We're only talking about veggies in this class, but I just wanted to throw those out there as some examples. And then some seeds actually need darkness in order to germinate, like allium. So that's just plants that are in the onion family. I grew chives one year, and I actually had to put my seedling flats inside of dark plastic garbage bags so I could get them to germinate. So that was just part of the germination process. And then some plants don't care what the temperature is, just as long as some plants don't care about light requirements. So how do you know what to do? I just kind of threw out a lot of information at you. Well, the easiest thing to do is going to be to read your seed packets, because there's a lot of really great information on your seed packet. So they're going to tell you whether or not the seed that you bought is going to do better as a transplant, so something that you grow out at home, or if you should direct seed it, and so that just means putting the seed into the ground. It's going to tell you how many days it's going to take for you to start your seed and get it to the size where you can outplant it into your garden. So the days to transplant, which will really help you with your timing. It'll tell you about all of those light requirements that I mentioned and optimum temperatures. Your seed packet will also go over how deep you should plant your seeds. So that kind of ties in with light requirements. In general, though, the rule is that you want to put your seed in the ground or in your growing media 2 times as deep as the seed is wide. So the bigger the seed, the deeper you want to go. So like pumpkins and melons, they have really big seeds. So those you want to get deep in the ground, but things like let's see, what's a really small seed? Lettuce is really small. Carrots can be really small. So those you're going to want to kind of just like sprinkle on, and then just sprinkle some growing media on top of it. You'll also get germination rates, so you can plan for how many seeds that you should sow, because I would expect things to die. So some companies will do germination tests and say, hey, we got 90% germination out of this packet of seed, which is actually really good. And then also on your seed packet, you can find information whether or not your seeds have been treated for disease resistance, or sometimes you'll see that they're pelleted. So if you see pelleted seeds, that just means they're covered with a coating. They'll do this a lot with like lettuce seeds, just so you can be more succinct with your sowing of the seeds, because lettuce seeds are really, really tiny. So let's just take a look at this seed packet right here. And this is from Botanical Illustrations. I like this company, they're good. So they have when to sow outside, and this is for kale. So 1 to 2 weeks before the average last frost date. So for you guys, that would be in April. And they also have directions for when to start inside. So 4 to 6 weeks before average last frost. So they're recommending that you can either sow these outside, or you can make starts inside, and then they tell you how long it's going to take to get your plant the size to where you can transplant it out into your garden. So here's 4 to 6 weeks. They also have seed depth. So here, you know that you're only going to want to put it 1/4 of an inch down into the ground or into your growing media. Then they tell you spacing here, a group of 4 seeds every 10 inches. Then they have row spacing. Then they have instructions on thinning. So that just means if you're planting outside and you've got a big row, you're doing row plantings and you're sprinkling your seeds in there and you get a lot of germination. So it'll pain you to do this. You need to thin your seeds out, because you have to give them enough room to grow up and get that, give you what you want. So super important to read your seed packet. Here's just another example that I really like to show, because this is from Johnny Seeds. I really like this seed company, and they have loads of information on their seed packet. So here, this is a zinnia. It's not a vegetable, but it is a really good example. So they're saying that you can either do a transplant here. So that means growing them out in your house, or you can direct seed them into your garden. So a lot of times if seed companies recommend that you don't direct sow into your garden, they'll say that. They'll say direct seed, not recommended. So that's a good clue to start them in your house. Here, I just wanted to show you, here's a germination rate. So they did germination trials and they got 93% germination. So that's pretty good. So you can count on getting a lot of germination out of this particular seed. Sometimes they're really low. So what that just tells you is that you're going to have to sow more seed to make up for the low germination. So reading your seed packet is really important. Here's a list of some varieties, and all of this information you can find online as well, but just plants that do better by just sticking the seed in the ground, direct seeding, include pumpkins, zucchini, squash, melons, beans, corn, lettuce, chives, beets, and carrots. And then the seeds that do better, or the plants that do better, when you start them from seed inside of your house and grow out those transplants to plant into your ground as actual plants, are tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, broccoli, leeks, onions, and kale. Of course, this isn't a comprehensive list, but I just wanted to pull out some pretty common crops that people are growing at home. And here's the full photo of Alyssa's bounty harvest from the summer, and it's in the shape of a heart, which is really cute. So how do you sow seeds? It's pretty simple, so I wouldn't be too intimidated by it. So what you're going to want to do is start with your moistened seed starting mix. And we'll look at some different examples of different mixes that you can use, but a surefire way to know that you're getting the right mix for starting seeds is to buy a seed starting mix. And I took it out of my office, but I had an example here. I taught another class, and it'll say it plain as day on the package, seed starting mix. Then you fill your pot up, and you don't want to fill it all the way up to the brim. So she's got it at a nice level here, because if you fill it all the way up to the brim and then you put your teeny tiny little seeds in there, and then you go to water your seeds, then they could potentially just spill over, and then you've lost all of your seeds out of your pot. You're gonna make a hole with a pencil if you have bigger seeds. Sometimes if you have tiny seeds, you can just sew them on top and push them down, and then sprinkle it with your growing media. So cover your seeds, and then water your seeds with a really light mist. Avoid watering with something that has like a really forceful stream, because you will most likely just knock the seeds out of your pot. And then place them in a sunny location if you have one in your house, or underneath some fluorescent lights. So remember, you just kind of want to look for that moist, but not too wet, but not too dry, happy medium, maybe like a wet sponge. If you're squeezing water out of your growing media, it's way too wet. So here's some places that I like to get seeds online. Of course, Danielle's probably got some really great seeds at the hardware store. But Johnny Seeds, I really like them. They're a company out of Maine. Seeds of Change, Botanical Interests, one of our master gardeners in Flagstaff who teaches our vegetable curriculum for the higher elevations. He always recommends pine tree seeds. So I started ordering from them. He's been teaching the class since '92, so I think he knows what he's doing. And then once you get really good, you can collect your seeds and share them with your neighbors. And here's a picture of our Grow Flagstaff Seed Library at the Cooperative Extension Office. So here's an old card catalog, and they're actually just filled with seeds, and you can go in there. I mean, anybody can go in there. You guys, if next time you're in town, you could check it out. It's closed right now because of COVID, but yeah, all the seeds are in these drawers, and they're alphabetical by common name, and you just go in and you check out a packet of seeds with the hopes. It's not required, but that's what keeps the seed library going, is if you grow out the plants and then you return the seeds in the fall.
And Gail, I don't know, I could ask everybody here, does anybody know, I know in our Master Gardeners class, they were talking about maybe setting up a seed library at our library. Does anybody know if that ended up happening?
I don't think so.
Well, maybe I planted the seed.
Always do it, yeah.
Yeah.
Good idea.
It would be awesome, because the seeds that we have in the Flagstaff Seed Library, I mean, they're all from gardeners at 7,000 feet, which is a lot higher than you guys in Page. So the more that you start saving your own seeds and page and sharing them with the community, those seeds are going to become adapted to the page growing climate.
Hmm.
So
I tried to do a seed swap in the library years ago. I was very lonely at a table, but because people thought how strange. Maybe it just takes the one time. But a seed library, you know, people could come in when they wanted to. Of course, it's restricted a little bit now. Not too much. I think it's, you can go in and wander. You have to wear a mask, of course.
well, food for thought. I think you guys should go for it. That'd be awesome. So here's some, I just wanted to show pictures. You know, you don't really need fancy professional nursery containers to start your seeds. Look, we've got some butter containers, egg cartons work well. The little yogurt containers, they work really well too. But just remember to punch holes in the bottom of them because you need to provide that drainage for your plants. And you can reuse them from year after year, which is great as long as they hold up. Probably not egg cartons, but the other plastic things you can. Just remember to sterilize them in between use with just a 10% bleach solution to kill pathogens and other pests that could potentially harm your, especially fragile seedlings. So here's a photo of some supplemental light. Now this is a setup that you can buy from one of many of the greenhouse supply stores that are made. This is made for the home gardener. This setup isn't really that expensive. I think with everything, it might be like $75. You can use it, you know, year after year. But again, all you need really are fluorescent lights. So this is just nice because you get a lot of coverage. So that's just in the case where there's not enough light in the window. Remember to keep your light about 2 to 4 inches up from your plants because they will start stretching and getting really leggy because they're looking for that light. So you want to grow out some really stout, super healthy plants. So if they're reaching and getting leggy, that means that they're not getting what they need. And your seedlings will need 16 hours of light to get strong. So just some more thoughts on caring for your seedlings. Read your starting mix for fertilizing instructions. So when you're buying commercial seedling mix, and we'll compare a bunch of different mixes, but one of the main advantages of the commercial mixes, even though they're more expensive than just like making your own, they've got initial fertilizers in there. They've got things called wetting agents. They've got pH adjusters. So just read your bag so you know what's in your mix, because a lot of times they'll have a starter fertilizer in there. So they'll say, okay, hey, this fertilizer is good enough for the first 2 weeks of the plant's life, and then you're going to have to step up and start fertilizing it. So when you're gardening, just read every single label of every single product that you buy, because there really is a lot of really useful information on your packets. So when you figure out the fertilizing situation of your growing media, you're going to have to most likely introduce some supplemental fertilizers to your seedlings. So I recommend using a water soluble solution. One that I really like is called Grow Big. And I have a picture of it up there. And what's nice about that is that you can dilute it yourself, and it's got recipes for either mature plants or seedlings, or for a heavy feeding if you need to do a heavy feeding. So what I really like about it is that you have a lot of options. And then for seedlings, you can make that into your fertilizer into a little spray bottle, and then just gently mist your seedlings. So you don't want to start feeding your plants, your seedlings, until they've got the first true leaves developed. So here you can see these are young tomatoes. These are called the cotyledons, and they're the first leaves that come out when your seeds start germinating. But here are the first set of true leaves that come out. So this is when the plants are starting to grow and mature. So when you start seeing this and maybe even like another set of true leaves, then I would say to go ahead and fertilize if your growing media says it's okay. So if they're like, after 2 weeks, you're going to need to step up, then do that. Because you don't want to burn your plants. You don't want to, especially these young seedlings.
What about using the soil in your gardens? I always think the plants are shocked when they get put outside in Page.
Yeah, so you don't really, when you're starting plants indoors, you want to avoid using native soil because one, there could be disease and pests, and you know, you guys don't really deal with clay soil, but like a heavy clay soil like what we deal with in Flagstaff is too heavy for starting your own vegetable seeds. So vegetables, and we'll talk more about this next week in soils. The only thing that's really adapted to soils in Page and Flagstaff are our native plants. They're just like, it's really, these plants aren't native vegetables. So we really need to kind of baby them to get them healthy. So we usually don't recommend starting in native soil, but that's a good question. So you may need to thin your plants out. As I said before, it's hard to do, but your plants are going to be happier. So here you've got a couple of plant 2 per, seems like this person sowed their seeds 2 per cell. Sometimes it's better to sow a couple of seeds in a pot. So that way you're guaranteed, hopefully, to get a plant. But eventually you're going to have to sacrifice one of those, or you could tease them out and then that's fine to get 2 plants. And then once your plants get big and strong, then you can start transplanting them into bigger pots and then keep growing them out until they're a good size to get out into your garden. So we'll talk about getting seeds out into your garden later on in the talk, or your transplants out into your garden. So just some additional thoughts I have on seeds. So know what you're buying. There are a lot of options out there. So there's heirloom, open pollinated, hybrid, or GMO. You most likely are not going to be buying GMO seeds because the people who breed those seeds have patents on them. But you hear, we could do an entire class on GMO seeds, but heirloom and open pollinated, those, if you guys are saving your own seeds, you're going to want to go for these type of varieties, heirloom or open pollinated, because when you collect them, they're going to be true to the parent plant, unless you're growing something that's closely related right next to it. So if you have 2 varieties of corn right next to each other in your garden and you want to save those seeds, they're probably going to cross pollinate. So the seeds that you collect off that corn are not going to look like the parent plant. You're going to get a hybrid in there. So you can also buy hybrid seeds. You'll see that on your packet. And there's nothing wrong with hybrid seeds at all. They are bred by people in greenhouses, horticulturalists, who are selecting plants for some pretty superior traits. Hybrids aren't a bad thing at all, but you just can't collect seed off of them because they're not going to be true to the parent plant. So that's probably all very confusing. It's really hard to kind of grasp that concept, but just some food for thought. Maybe we could do an entire class on seeds someday up for you guys in Page, especially if you're starting a seed library. Actually, we should really do that. So let me know. Again, buy your seed from your reputable sources because they're going to have all that really great information. Read your packet and make tags. So here's some Genovese basil that I have started at the Arboretum. And I have each of these rows labeled because I probably had a couple of different varieties going on in this flat. And when they germinate, they all look exactly the same. And keep a journal. Keeping a journal is really important. It's going to help you plan for your next year. You may think that you're gonna remember when you started your tomato seedlings in your house and the next year, but you probably won't. And I learned this, definitely learned this the hard way. I tried to take some shortcuts one year by not writing down when, and I know better. I didn't write down when I started all of my veggies for a plant sale at the Arboretum one year. And I was like, oh, I'll remember. I do this for a living. And then the next year I was like, wait, when did I start those tomatoes? And was it good timing? So I had to teach myself all over again. And from then on, I kept a journal for vegetables every single year. So it's going to help you know if you started your seeds on time. Did you start them too early? Did you start them too late? Did that variety do well? Did you like it? So journals are a really great tool for a gardener. You can record what worked, what didn't. It can help you out big picture garden, remember what you planted from one year to the next, to help you with the crop rotation if you have a bigger space, and which in the long run is really going to help you with diseases and problems down the road, which Hattie will talk about in another series. So here we go again with this fancy word for potting soil called growing media. So growing media is it's really important. It's the material that your plants grow in. And it serves three main functions, just like soil. So it's just a fictitious soil that you're making that's disease-free and giving plants exactly what they want. So it supplies the roots with nutrients, air, and water. It allows for maximum root growth, and it physically supports the plants. That's pretty much what soil does. But when you're starting your own seeds at home, you don't want to use native soil because a lot of things can go wrong. It's not suitable for starting seeds, especially vegetables, but there's a lot out there that you can buy. So here's just a couple of products that I threw out there. So here, if you just read your bag, you see it's specifically made for seed starting. So this is from Miracle Grow, Black Gold. I really like this brand. This is what I use. You can see it's organic, so it's got that Omri label that Danielle was talking about last week. This one I've never heard of, but you could tell it's seedling mix. Is it really big? And then here's a potting soil. This isn't necessarily for seedlings, but I used to use this as a grower at the Arboretum. It's a really nice product. So this is all stuff that you could buy commercially, but you can make your own at home, which has its advantages and disadvantages. So here is a DIY mix that you can make at home, and it's just 50% perlite and 50% vermiculite or peat moss, and peat moss is going to be a lot cheaper for you. So the most important thing is that it's sterile. So it's going to be disease-free, pest-free. Perlite, you guys have probably all seen this if you've ever purchased a potting soil before. It's just the white stuff that's in there, and it's a volcanic rock that's popped like popcorn. So it gets heated to a really high temperature. And what this serves in your mix is aeration and drainage for your plants. This is a picture that I took of vermiculite. It's not as common as using peat moss. For the home gardener, I would probably recommend peat moss. It's going to be a lot cheaper, but what it does is they both do the same thing, and it helps to retain moisture and the nutrients, make the nutrients available for your plants so they're not just running right out of the bottom of the pot when you're fertilizing. But it's probably going to serve you a lot better if you can afford it. It's not really that much more to just buy a mix from the store, because the commercial seedling mixes usually have a lot of really good additives that are going to make your plant happy. Like I mentioned before, it's going to have the fertilizer. So if you're making your own with peat moss and perlite, it has nothing in it. So these seedling mixes have fertilizers. They have wetting agents, which helps keep the peat moss moist. So peat moss is hydrophobic, and that means if it dries out, it's really, really hard to get it wet again. And then it's got pH adjustment. So Danielle kind of talked about pH last week. I'll talk about it more next week in the soils talk, but peat moss is very acidic. It's probably like around 4.5 on the pH scale. And plants typically are very happy at 6.5 to 6.8. So it's really acidic. So these commercial mixes have a pH adjuster already made in there. So is potting soil really soil? Is your growing media really soil? No. So potting soil is a fictitious soil that we make at home, or the nurseries make, or your companies make, just to kind of give your plants what they need to grow healthy and strong. So after your seedlings have gotten big and they're ready to get transplanted into a bigger pot, you can buy a different soil mix specifically for bigger plants. And I recommend, again, to buy them commercially. I mean, you can make them yourself, but it's going to be a lot better to buy them commercially because they have those fertilizers, wetting agents, and pH adjusters in there. So transplanting is a step that you may have to do when you're growing at home, depending on the size of the pots that you're using and what you're growing. It's really good because it optimizes your plant growth, so they're not sitting in pots and getting root bound. And then you can also get your plants into new growing media or potting soil with nutrients. So for seedlings, it's best to do this after those first true leaves appear and they start getting stronger. So if you're starting seeds into smaller cell trays like this, then absolutely you're going to have to get them into bigger pots. And even in those yogurt containers and those egg containers, you're going to want to step your plants up and pot them up and get them bigger, because that would just be too small to plant into your garden, especially here. And just remember to be gentle with the young roots when you're doing this. So here's some pictures of some commercial containers that you can buy. This is what I would use at the Arboretum. These are not pictures of, well, I guess there's some basil right there, but these are all perennial plants. But I just wanted to show you different options out there and the system that I use at the Arboretum. So here I would start my seedlings in a cell tray, and then I would move them up into these 2-inch pots. And the reason why I would do that is because I was always pressed for space. And then also I grew a lot of native plants, well, mostly all native plants, and I could count on a lot of them dying. They were very hard to grow. So I would be, saving space and saving resources, with potting soil by going from here to here. This size of pot would be just fine to stick your seeds in if you're growing like tomatoes or basil or anything at home. But it's just, for me, I was saving space. So you might need to save space in your growing situation as well. Then after they would get big, I would put them into these bigger 4-inch pots here. And then finally, I would finish them off in 1 gallon. You guys will not be doing that with your vegetables. You'll probably stop around like the 4-inch size. But these are just pots that you can buy commercially. But like I said before, very easy to reuse household items. So hardening off is also very important. So hardening off your plant is basically just introducing it to the outdoor elements very slowly before you put it in the ground. When you're growing plants in a greenhouse, or if you're starting them from seed inside of your own house, you're creating the most perfect environment for those plants. So you're giving it the softest, most gentle light. You've got the perfect ideal temperature for your plant to make it thrive. You're watering it every day. There's no wind beating it up, no northern Arizona wind beating it up. So the last thing that you want to do is take your plants out of that environment and then stick them in the ground in the high desert. They will get crushed. So we have a process for this called hardening them off, and it's very simple. So all you do is take your plants, your transplants, put them outside in the shade for a few days, but take them in at night. Then, especially because we get pretty, I mean, you guys don't have like the huge differences between day and night temperatures like we do here in Flag, but you do have them. So just watch the weather. Then over the next few days, you're slowly going to introduce your plants to the sun. And then I would start with morning sun or afternoon sun. You probably don't want to throw them out in the hottest part of the day at first. Then after a few days of doing that and you've left them outside overnight, the temperatures are good. Then you could eventually leave them outside for a few more days overnight. So this process probably takes around 7 to 10 days, and then they should be ready to go into the ground. One thing that I wanted to talk about was container gardening, because Danielle mentioned container gardening and raised bed gardening. Sometimes we have to do that in Northern Arizona. We just don't, it would cost a gazillion dollars if you were to haul in soil. Sometimes you don't have the space. Sometimes you're gardening on bedrock. So container gardening and raised bed gardening is a really good option for us here in Northern Arizona. And there's a ton of veggies that you can grow in containers. So all of these plants, greens, herbs, tomatoes, edible flowers, eggplants, peppers, cucumbers, potatoes, and peas all do really, really well in containers. So when you're choosing your container, anything can become a container, just like the yogurt containers and the egg cartons when you're starting seeds. Big picture, you can recycle or reuse a lot of different things for containers, like buckets, pallets. My neighbor had a bathtub, sheep trough, wheelbarrow, just as long as you've got those drainage holes in there. So when you're container gardening, small pots tend to dry out faster, and the dark colors could heat up the roots and sunny spots. So just keep that in mind. And you're going to want to look for lightweight materials if you plan to move your pots around. So sometimes in Northern Arizona, you really, really want to grow those tomatoes, but you don't have the right space in it for it. Like for us, we're growing underneath pine trees a lot. So you can follow the sun with your container. So that's another advantage of container gardening. But just remember, drainage hole are a must, and it's best to fill them with just by a potting soil. I think one mistake that people make is they really want to put gravel on the bottom, at the bottom of their pots, but what you're doing here is creating a perched water table, and you're also making your pots super duper heavy. So a perched water table is when, and it occurs naturally in pots no matter what. So it's when the water, the pores in your soil, potting soil, fill with water. Right? So that happens naturally. If you look at the bottom of a pot, it's usually like kind of mucky no matter what. When you put gravel in there, all it does is raise that perched water table. So now your plant roots they don't have much room to grow in. So I advise not to do that. So here's some pictures of some containers. Here's buckets. Look at these tomatoes growing in buckets here. These bags are pretty cool. You can, if you got a buddy, you could pick them up and move them wherever you want. So when you're container gardening, just keep in mind plant depth, because optimum root plant or depth that your roots will need. So just in general, 4 to 5 inches for things like chives and lettuce. A little deeper here for your beans, onions, peas, carrots, of course, they grow deep into the soil. So they're going to be a little deeper. Eggplants, 10 to 12 inches for beets and broccoli. Tomatoes, so everybody wants to grow tomatoes. They're going to need like a pretty deep pot. 5-gallon buckets actually work really, really well. My last piece of advice for container gardening is just to remember, when you plant a puppy, make sure the container can comfortably accommodate the full-grown pot. Just make sure there's enough room in your pot for where your plants grow up. Was there a question?
Hopefully that's not seedlings.
Okay, So here's some pictures. I really wanted to show you some pictures of raised beds. This is at Hosehoney in Flagstaff. They've got, they're not 2x4s. I'm not a carpenter, and they're not railroad ties, so just bigger pieces of wood here. And look, they're gardening on pavement with raised beds. And it sounds like some of you are gardening on bedrock, according from what I gathered from Danielle. Like some of you might have super deep soil, and some of you might have just like sand, or some of you might have super deep sandy soil, and some of you might have rock. So building up is the way to go. How about this for gardeners who don't want to bend over anymore? So this is a really nice raised bed. And these ladies don't have to bend over to plant or harvest. That was at the hospice in Flagstaff. Talk about terrible soil. This is our bus stop garden in front of the Cooperative Extension Office in Flagstaff. We have cinder. So that's what we were gardening in. So we dug down deep, got rid of the cinders, just amended the soil, and built up some raised beds. And look at the beautiful garden. And there's an elementary school across the street, and the kids planted this, and they named it the bus stop garden because there's a bus stop right by it. So that's our little community garden. Here's another picture. These are pine logs. This is at another community garden in Flagstaff. So, just like we need to build up here in northern Arizona. Sometimes it just works better. So soil for your raised beds, where do you get it? Somebody asked it last week. It is very expensive at first, but you can purchase raised bed potting mix. Hattie and I really like this Kellogg's brand. You can get it at Home Depot. I don't know if they have it in Page, but most likely it's pretty common. You can make your own. It can get kind of difficult, but somebody did ask if you can get topsoil in Page. I don't think you can in Page, according to Danielle, but you can get it in Flagstaff, and they sell it by the 5-gallon bucket, or you can get it by the cubic yard and just have them dump it with their machinery into the back of your truck. And it's amended with 20% mule manure from the mules at Grand Canyon, and it's good stuff. So here's a couple. You don't want to use just topsoil in there. You want to mix other things into the topsoil, because the topsoil will be just too heavy. So here's a couple of recipes from the U of A publication. You can Google search this online, but here are just a few different recipes that you can use to make your own potting soil, but really it's easier to kind of just buy your own. Fertilizers. So when we're fertilizing our plants, there's 3 really important numbers to look for, and they are NPK. So here it is right here, 16, 18, 18. That's your NPK. What that means is it's your percent by weight of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And we'll talk a little bit more about this stuff next week, but in general, so Jim Mast, who's our master gardener who teaches the vegetable curriculum since '92, he says, I'm going to do kindergarten gardening right now. And this is a very complicated process, but I'm going to break it down super simple. Nitrogen is going to be for your foliar growth. Phosphorus is for fruit and flowers, and potassium is for overall root and plant health. So another really important situation where you're going to want to read your packet, because not all fertilizer is equal. There are so many different options out there. So a complete fertilizer is going to contain all 3 of those primary nutrients, your NPK. And an incomplete is one that's missing one of those primary nutrients. So a good example of this would be lawn fertilizer. And that's the last thing that you want to use on your vegetable plants, because it's got tons of nitrogen, right? Because that's what they want when you're growing grass. You want to promote all that green growth. So really, really high nitrogen content. If you dump a whole bunch of nitrogen on your tomato plants, what you're going to get is super lush, really beautiful green plants with no flowers or fruit. They have acidic plant fertilizers. If you ever are brave enough to try something like blueberries here, which I don't recommend, there's slow release fertilizers that just does what it says. It's slow release. It releases fertilizer across a period of time. And then there's also fertilizers and pesticide combination, which we don't really recommend at Cooperative Extension because treating your insect pests really is going to depend on the life cycle of the pest. So here's just some comparisons of synthetic versus organic fertilizer. So there's a lot of product out there. People are really into organic right now, which is great. So the main difference is that organic fertilizer is the remains or byproducts of plants or animals. So your cotton seed meal, blood meal, fish meal, manures, those are all going to be organic based fertilizers. Synthetics are just that. So they're synthetic materials. So organics can be more expensive. You usually have to fertilize more with organics. Because they have relatively low nutrient content. They can contain a lot of micronutrients, which is really good for your plants. And especially when you're adding compost, you're amending your soil with more organic matter. The organic fertilizers are slow release. So they have that low burn potential when you're applying them, and they have beneficial microorganisms. So when we look at synthetic materials, they're usually less expensive. You get more bang for your buck. They're available, the nutrients are available to the plant pretty quickly. And one thing that is bad is that they do have a greater potential for burning your plant because they tend to be stronger than the organic fertilizers. So here's some, if you're looking for organic fertilizers that you can use from your home, say like you've got chickens and you want to make that into fertilizer, just know what the NPK is of your different manures, because it could potentially burn your plants. So nitrogen has chicken manure has a relatively high nitrogen content when compared to cow manure. So look up here, dried blood has a really high nitrogen content. So you could really burn your plants with that. So this information, I know I'm kind of buzzing through this. We could do an entire class on it, but just understand what NPK is and understand that not all fertilizers are alike at all. So here's a whole bunch of different products that you can buy. Some of them are related or labeled organic. Some of them aren't. Sea kelp, fish kelp. Here's something that I really like to use that really helps with transplant shock. But so just read your label, because you know they've made it pretty easy for you. If you're growing tomatoes, look for tomato fertilizer. It's going to have exactly what your tomato plants need. So when do you add fertilizer? Well, again, it's going to depend on what you're growing and what you're using. So we'll talk a lot about soil amendments next week. So in the fall is a really good time to add amendments that are not composted. So like your manures, your vegetable scraps, and that way they're just going to kind of break down in the soil over the winter. In the spring, we recommend adding amendments when you're using your composted material that you've made, or you're using store-bought products. So that's usually good in the beginning of the season. And then you'll have to supplement, depending on what you're growing, there's recommendations for supplemental feeding. So just again, read your label so you know when it's appropriate to add fertilizers. So watering, really important. And one of the #1 questions that master gardeners get is how much and how often. That's what people really want to know. So simply put, you can just think of the 1, 2, 3 rule. Okay, so 1 foot deep for your smaller plants. So it's going to be like your veggies, your perennial plants. 2 feet. You want to go 2 feet down for shrubs and 3 feet for trees. So this is a veggie class, but I just wanted to throw that out there for comparison, because what you want to do is you want to saturate that root zone, because that's where the plants are getting water. They're getting it through the roots. So how often is really going to depend on what you're growing and the weather. So there's no really simple answer. But for veggies, Danielle recommends in Page that in the summer where it's super hot in Page, you're going to want to apply water twice a day, and do it in the morning and do it in the afternoon, and avoid watering in the middle of the day. So when we are watering in the high desert, the most efficient way to water your plants is going to be to set up a really simple drip irrigation system. And we have a master gardener in training that is going to tell us all about that. But before I introduce her, I just kind of want to compare hand watering with drip. So drip it's relatively inexpensive to set up. It can be super easy. You can usually find all of the parts that you need at the local hardware store, and it's really efficient. So it's not, if you're watering with a sprinkler and you've got sprinkler heads up, that a lot of that water, especially in our hot, dry, windy environment, isn't really going to get delivered to the plants. So drip is precision. You've got these little drip emitter. So here's the tubing. Here is, you can see the drip right here. They've got little holes. This tubing has little holes that will drip directly down into the soil and saturate that root zone that you want to get wet. I have not set up a drip system at my house, and every single year I say that I'm going to do it. And I swear this year I'm doing it, because hand watering, I could stand there, though it is, okay, so we'll talk about hand watering, and that's just, using your watering wand. It's relaxing. I mean, I kind of like doing it. So that's one advantage of doing it. You are looking at your plants every day when you're doing that. So you can kind of check on them and see what's going on. One downfall is that it's super time consuming. You could stand there, and I do this in Flagstaff. Every year I water my garden, and I'm standing there, especially with my native plants, because I'm working with native soil here, but not so much in my veggie garden. But this is just an example. Watering my plants, I'm standing there for what feels like hours. Then I go and I move the mulch and leaves and everything away, and like I could blow on the soil and dust could come out. It's like, what even happened? It didn't really soak into the ground. So that's where drip is like so efficient. And Hattie, the director at Cooperative Extension, who's teaching one of these classes, put in a drip system, and her water bill actually went down. So just something to think about. And with that, let's see, should we do questions first, or let's just bring Karina. Karina, are you here? I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but I did want to share. I found this really funny cartoon, the herb garden. So before we open up the floor to questions, we have Karina, hopefully. Yeah, I see her. So Karina Elliott is one of your Page Master Gardeners in training. And she was in the very first online class that we offered last spring, so spring of 2020. And she is a Page local, and she's going to show you the pieces that she got for her drip irrigation system in town. So take it away, Karina, and thanks for joining us.
Well, hello, everyone. Just a quick answer. Someone said, how can you fill up your raised beds? Because the soil is expensive. What I'm doing this year is I'm actually digging a 2 by 2 by a 1 foot hole and taking the soil out, amending it, and then putting it back in.
Hmm.
The first time I'm doing this, I'll let you know how it goes. I'll put in pictures of my raised beds. I'm using leftover toys to make the beds. It looks really cute. I know you can't see the whimsy about it. It's colored gym mats. So they're squares. So they're
Oh.
different colored squares that I'm refilling with my native soil. I have mostly sand. So when you talk about watering, with me being mostly sand, you really only have to go down a foot. Like Gail was saying, I'm from Phoenix and we're used to just flooding the fields. You just flood everything and that's good enough. Well, the problem with my sanding soil is that it just goes straight through. So drip irrigation allows you to put just enough. I know.
Baby.
The best thing to do when you're first starting out is to get a kit. Now, I'm not advocating Walmart or Ace or anyone in particular, but the reason I say that is because the timers are expensive. And to me, the heart of the whole situation is a timer. There's no reason to have any kind of drip irrigation unless it's automatic. So the kits are about 50, 60. I sell them at $50 and it comes with the timer, which you have to keep from freezing. So I've lost a couple that way by allowing them to be outside and they freeze.
Oh, no.
And another is, oh, well, I think the 2-year-old's here. Let me mute them up. Excuse me.
Let's see the baby.
That's everybody right now. I have to lock my kitty out. Start jumping all over my screen. Well, while she's muted,
Good.
Oh, let's
No, can't do it. But it comes with the basics for a garden. No, I can't. I'm sorry. Let me go find the baby.
that's okay. So if she, what we can do is we still have some time, so I can answer any questions that you might have about plant care or seed sowing, and then if Karina, if she can't come back, I can talk a little bit about drip irrigation kits too.
Are little peat pots good to use?
Peat
And
pots.
And just take them out and put them in the ground?
Yeah, what we always recommend is that before you put them in the ground, just try to cut the pot out a little bit, especially the bottom, because sometimes they stay kind of root bound in those pots.
Oh,
And then in our dry environment, it takes forever for them to break down.
that's true.
But I mean, they're good because you're not using plastic.
I have a question about watering. When you say water 1 foot for your vegetables, and you have a drip system, is there a method of figuring out how much time that is? Say you're doing your trees and then you got your garden. How do you know you've gotten down 1 foot?
Yeah, there is a formula for that, and I do not know how to do it. The best thing that you could do really is if you have a soil probe is ideal, but you could find something that just is maybe like a stick, and if you stick the soil probe down into the soil, it's going to move slowly through the wet soil, and then once you hit the well, maybe not with sand, but in other situations you can measure the moisture of the soil or how deep you watered by sticking a soil probe down into the soil, and it'll stop when it hits. There'll be more resistance in the soil when it's not wet. But I don't know, I'm sitting here thinking with sand, that's probably not the case.
So it sounds like that would be a good investment, a soil probe, because then you can make the adjustments to your timer.
Yeah, I mean, that's what the professor from U of A who teaches the Master Gardener portion, of the water management, he recommends a soil probe.
I know it's kind of, everybody's is going to be different. I guess mine was a lot less than I thought it would be time-wise. So like I had a lot of hay on the top to keep the moisture in the dirt. But in the very heat of the summer, I did 10 minutes on the soaker hose in the morning and 10 minutes at night. And that was only for like 2 weeks. And besides that, I think I only did 5 minutes in the morning and 5 minutes at night. So it was like, and I did like 5:30, 6 o'clock at both times. A lot less for how hot Paige is than I thought it would be.
Wow, I'm surprised. That sounds like not a lot of time.
Okay, it looks like we Karina's got the baby quieted, so maybe we should take advantage of this and let her go.
Yeah. The nice thing about drip irrigation, it's completely customizable. For like example, some people are saying that maybe that doesn't sound like enough water. It's so easy just to increase the water flow or decrease the water flow. I mean, you can control the amount of time you're watering, but each drip irrigation head is done by gallons per hour. And you can have a 1 gallon, a 2 gallon, they have 4 gallons, and they even have little tiny mini sprinklers. So for example, you can have, like with me, I will have squash in one with my pumpkins, and those need a lot of water. And then right next to it could be something that doesn't necessarily need to be soaked quite as heavily. So it's really at first a lot of trial and error. Look at your plants. Are they wilting? Then increase the water, maybe change when you're watering. It's, with one timer and one outlet, it's kind of, it's a saving grace to be able to adjust each plant's water output individually. I can't always have a million different settings for everything, but drip is customizable. They make tiny soaker hoses that are 1/4 inch in diameter. So you can run those through like your lettuce, your kale. I have hummingbird mix that I want to grow this year. I have Johnny jump ups, a teeny tiny soaker hose would be perfect to go in between those. And maybe you only need a little bit of water. With my sand, I don't deep soak very much anymore, except for my trees. But for my vegetables, yeah, it's just whatever hits those few minutes in the morning, I do in the afternoon. If it's been a really super long, hot day, I might water in the middle of the night, anything to keep them from wilting. I find my plants do not recover well if I let them wilt. They just don't. It's nice not to water the leaves. I know for a fact that someone told me, don't water your squash. Well, I got the squash leaves wet. Next thing you know, I had mildew. Well, that devastated my entire crop. So the nice thing with drip is you can put it right at the base of the plant and you won't get any of your leaves wet. It also helps not to have excess water laying around. That seems to attract more bugs. I had a lot of insects that I was having trouble with. Last year was a big learning opportunity, to how to adjust the water, how to get rid of the bugs, how not to get the leaves wet. And you just go outside and tinker with it. You don't, it's a very forgiving system. It's easy to cut. You can use just scissors with it. If you get it, they sell all the individual pieces, and I'll put the pictures up so that you can see all the different fixtures and pieces that you can have. Oh, there's Ava.
She loved.
Oh, she's left. Under the influence of toddlers. I'm raising my grandkids. So I guess the cartoons and the bottles and the bananas were not enough. I went and took pictures at ACE, and I will put those up. All the different ratios that like the 4 gallon soaker tips are a different color, so you won't get them mixed up. They have things called goof plugs, so that if you make an opening in your 1/2 inch hose, you can just plug it right up. It's fun to try. I will put up something that shows how my garden was set up last year. I basically just wove in between all my garden beds and then just ran a 1/4 inch piping to each individual plant, and it worked out really well. But like I said, I have lots of pictures from ACE. I'll go ahead and put them up. I'll show you links to maybe where you can buy some of these things from Walmart. It's really worth a try. I know what you're saying about watering by hand. Late afternoon, it's hot. It smells so beautiful when you water by hand.
Mhm.
It's soothing. But I had a friend that had to go home every single afternoon because he didn't have a drip system. You know, he would stop in the middle of dinner and say, "Oh my gosh, I forgot, I have to go home." Well, it's true. Oh, his mom was going to kill him if those plants didn't get watered every night. You know, his mom was very particular, so he would drop everything and run home. I don't think that's practical for anyone, really. You know, if you forget a day or two, like I said, I'm under the influence of near twins. I don't always get out every day. You know, I could forget and be gone 2-3 days and be busy with the kids and know that my plants are okay.
If
You know,
you,
it's not ideal, but it's good to know that things are okay.
so I gave everybody a link to our YouTube channel, and there are some really great videos that Hattie and I made, just gardening information videos. And we did one of a drip irrigation kit and how to set that up. And we used our bus stop garden as the example. So if you want to see how easy it is to set up that drip irrigation system, go ahead and visit our YouTube channel and check that out. Oh, well, Karina, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. Sounds a little hectic at your house, so if you're good, we thank you so much. We can end here unless anybody has more questions. That's fine. I'm happy to stay on, but it is about 7 o'clock, so we'll wrap up on time. For next week, I'll be teaching the class, and it's going to be all about soils, soil amendments, and home composting. So hopefully you'll tune in for that. And yeah, visit our YouTube channel, and I'll see you next week.
Thank you. That was very informative.
Thank you. Where can I find the YouTube link? I don't know where that YouTube link is.
Who said that?
Melissa.
Melissa, have you been getting the emails from me?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I sent it out last week, but if you just Google search Coconino County Cooperative Extension YouTube, it should pop up.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Alyssa, for being the co-hostess with the mostest.
Thanks for doing that, Gail. That was good.
Good. All right.
Thanks.
Night.
See you
Night.
later. Bye.
Thanks.